The town sat proudly under the sun, where old mud houses stood beside tall iron gates and polished cars. In the mornings, elders still gathered under the big neem tree to settle matters with calm voices and slow wisdom. By afternoon, traders checked their phones, counting profits and speaking of new deals. Tradition and modern wealth walked the same dusty roads, sometimes side by side, sometimes pulling in opposite directions. In this town, people were measured not only by who they were, but by what they owned and how they were seen. Appearances mattered. A clean compound earned respect. A powerful name opened doors. And a whispered rumor could close them just as fast. At the center of this town stood a large family compound, surrounded by high walls and heavy gates. It was the kind of home people pointed at when passing by. "That house carries history," they would say. Inside its walls lived wealth, lineage, and secrets buried deep like old roots beneath the soil. The compound had many rooms, yet its silence was louder than noise. Servants moved carefully, as if the walls themselves were listening. Wealth filled the house, but peace did not. Like many great homes, it shone brightly from the outside while hiding cracks within. The man who built that house was gone. He had been a respected figure, known for fairness and calm judgment. When he spoke, people listened. When he decided, arguments ended. His death came quietly, but its effects did not. Without him, the house lost its balance. His chair remained empty, yet his presence lingered in every corner. Sometimes, servants would lower their voices, saying, "If Baba were here, this would not happen." But Baba was not there. And in his absence, justice had no strong hand to guide it. Before his death, he had loved two women in different ways. The first wife had built the home with patience and sacrifice. Her legacy lived in quiet dignity and discipline. The second wife arrived later, with sharp eyes and strong ambition. After the man's death, control slipped into her hands. What had once been shared became seized. Respect turned into fear. Jealousy grew where balance once stood. The rivalry between the past and the present became a silent war, fought not with words, but with actions. In that same house lived a daughter who should have been seen, yet was often overlooked. She was born into comfort but raised in quiet neglect. She ate well and slept under a strong roof, yet her heart carried loneliness. No one beat her, yet her spirit felt bruised. She learned early to speak little and observe much. When others laughed, she smiled softly. When pain came, she swallowed it. Sometimes she stood alone in the courtyard and whispered to herself, "My father knew me." That knowledge became her strength. Though surrounded by people, she grew up in silence, holding her dignity tightly, like a fragile pot that must not break, no matter how heavy the hands around it became. And so, in a house full of voices, one truth remained quietly waiting. Each day, her hands learned new kinds of silence. What once were small household tasks slowly turned into duties meant for servants. She swept the courtyard before sunrise while others still slept. She washed plates long after laughter had faded from the dining room. No one announced the change. It happened quietly, like a shadow stretching as the sun moved. With every chore, her name was spoken less. People began to call her only when work was needed. "Girl," the stepmother would say without looking up. "Yes, Mama," she would answer, lowering her eyes. In that house, power did not shout. It whispered. It took a rightful place and pushed it slowly into a corner. And as her hands grew busy, her identity was gently erased, one task at a time. Yet she did not break. Her patience was not born from fear, but from lessons older than the walls around her. She remembered the sayings of elders who once sat under the tree near the village stream. "The palm tree does not bend to every wind," they used to say. When pain rose in her chest, she breathed and reminded herself that endurance was also strength. At night, when the compound slept, she sat alone and whispered prayers taught by her grandmother. She believed patience was not weakness, but a quiet promise that justice was listening. Her dignity stayed with her, even when no one else defended it. Her father's voice lived in her memory like a hidden amulet. She carried his teachings wherever she went, unseen but powerful. He once told her, "A clean heart is heavier than gold. Never drop it." When the world tried to shrink her, those words lifted her. Even when truth was buried, she believed it still breathed. But fear ruled another heart in that same house. The stepmother walked with her head high, but her eyes were always watching. Control wrapped around her like a crown, heavy and tight. She feared losing what she had taken. Every order she gave was a reminder to herself that she was in charge. "Make sure she stays where she belongs," she told the servants. "She knows her place," they replied softly. To secure her present power, she rewrote the past. Stories were changed. Memories were twisted. The daughter became a favor, not family. The truth was folded and locked away, while a new story was told loudly and often. Betrayal did not come like thunder. It came like slow rain, steady and deliberate. And still, somewhere beneath the lies, memory waited, patient, unforgotten, and alive. The announcement came like a drumbeat through the house, echoing off walls that had held secrets for years. Word spread quickly. The family was hosting a gathering, a meeting of elders, influential traders, and voices that carried the weight of the town. The courtyard was swept, the gates polished, and servants moved with a nervous rhythm, aware that today masks would be tested, and truths might strain against the thin fabric of pride. "Prepare yourself, daughter," the stepmother said, her voice smooth yet sharp. "Tonight, everyone will see where you belong." "Yes, Mama," she replied, keeping her eyes lowered, though her heart thrummed like a drum of warning. As the sun sank low, guests began arriving, their footsteps deliberate on the stone pathway. Elders nodded to one another, their gaze measured and knowing. Traders whispered business, their words carrying the weight of influence. Every pair of eyes seemed to weigh the house, the family, and her, though she stood quietly, unnoticed by most. The presence of these respected figures magnified every expectation, every judgment. In this town, honor was public, and shame was inherited by anyone standing in its shadow. The stepmother moved through the guests with practiced ease. She greeted elders with laughter that hid her sharp edges, exchanged bows with men of power, and painted a picture of a flawless household. Then, with a deliberate step, she approached the girl and called her forward. "Everyone, this is the maid," she announced, voice loud and unwavering. A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd. Some laughed politely, unsure if it was jest. Others glanced at her, measuring her small frame, the dust on her feet, the humility in her posture. Her chest tightened, but she did not speak. She straightened her back and lowered her eyes, embodying patience taught through generations. In the silence of her restraint, she carried strength that no laughter could touch. Whispers grew, judgment whispered in corners. "Is this truly the daughter of Baba?" one elder murmured to another. Eyes darted between her and the stepmother, assumptions shaping a story already written in the mind before truth had a chance. The house seemed to close in around her, yet she stood quietly, knowing the river runs deepest beneath the surface, unseen but powerful. Even in the crowd's laughter, her mind held the lessons of her father. Truth waits patiently, even when pride shouts. She breathed slowly, letting the moment stretch. Silence was her shield, endurance her companion, and dignity her unspoken armor. And in that silence, a seed of questioning was planted. Somewhere between prideful declarations and whispered assumptions, a question hung in the air. How long can lies rule when the eyes of many have already begun to see? How long can truth remain buried when patience stands ready, like a tree whose roots will not fail? The courtyard, once filled with noise, now trembled with anticipation. The stage was set, the crowd unaware that the story had already begun to shift. Pride had risen high, but the soil beneath it held memory, justice, and the quiet promise that one day silence would speak louder than any falsehood. Her cheeks burned, though no one in the room noticed. Laughter floated over the polished courtyard, but it was not meant for her. The title, Maid, clung to her like a shadow she could not shake. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet rage that simmered beneath her calm face. Anger wanted to leap forward, to speak, to break the lie that had been woven around her like a thin rope, but she held it down. Culture had taught her restraint, tradition had taught her patience. She remembered the words her grandmother used to murmur, "A woman's strength is measured by the silence she carries." Her heart pulled in two directions. Part of her wanted to shout, to demand the respect that was hers by birth. But another part, older and wiser, whispered through the echoes of her ancestors. "Endure, child. The river does not roar at every stone it meets." She breathed slowly, letting the lesson sink deep, feeling the weight of dignity that came from waiting, not reacting. In the quiet of her mind, she heard her father's voice, calm and steady, speaking truths that had been forgotten by the walls of the house. Even in silence, my child, you are never powerless. Let your heart be firm, and let others speak their noise. Truth travels, even if it walks slowly. Those words wrapped around her like a cloak, giving her courage that no insult could take away. She chose silence as a shield, not surrender. Each whispered insult, each amused glance from the guests, was met with stillness. Her eyes lowered, her back straightened, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She remembered the proverb her mother once said, "The quiet river runs deepest." Beneath the surface, currents of strength and resilience swirled, unseen by those who thought they controlled the flow. The stepmother moved like a hawk among the gathered crowd, her control tightening with every glance and command. Orders were given with a calm smile, each one a reminder that the girl belonged to the boundaries she had set. "Make sure the floors are spotless," she said casually, though everyone heard the undercurrent of authority. Servants scurried, and the girl obeyed, the rope of unspoken power curling ever tighter around her silent neck. Every glance from the stepmother, every carefully measured gesture, reinforced the hierarchy. She was visible, yet invisible, present, yet powerless in appearance. And yet, beneath the weight of humiliation, beneath the controlling hand of the stepmother, the girl's heart held a quiet fire. She endured not for revenge, but because she knew the strength of patience, the power of dignity, and the eventual triumph of truth patiently carried like a river deep beneath the sunlit surface. The courtyard gleamed under the late afternoon sun, yet the warmth could not soften the chill in her chest. The stepmother's eyes scanned the crowd, a spark of satisfaction in their dark depths. She stepped forward, raising her voice just enough to carry to the guests, yet sharp enough to sting the girl who stood quietly beside her. "Fetch the trays from the kitchen," she commanded, her tone casual but pointed. "And make sure the plates shine brighter than your smile." "Yes, Mama," the girl whispered, bending low to obey. Each step she took was careful, measured, her hands trembling slightly beneath the weight of public humiliation. The servants moved quickly, trying to keep pace, while the crowd murmured, watching her every action. A ripple of laughter followed the stepmother's next words. "Oh, and don't forget to carry the teacups like they are filled with gold. Wouldn't want to drop them like some careless servant now, would we?" Her voice was light, almost teasing, but the edges of the words cut deep. The guests chuckled politely. Some even leaned closer to whisper their amusement to one another. Each laugh was a nail hammered into a false reality, strengthening the throne that had been built on her humiliation. The stepmother's smile widened. "You see, everyone," she said, gesturing at the girl as she adjusted a tray, "we all must know our place. Even within a house of grandeur, some must remember who serves." Eyes swept across the courtyard. Some measured the girl's worth by the shimmer of her dress, the dust on her shoes, the tilt of her posture. Elders observed, nodding politely but taking mental notes of her rank. Traders whispered, noting her silence and obedience, as if that alone justified the title the stepmother had assigned. The crowd's judgment fell like dry leaves, brittle and sharp, cracking under the weight of societal expectations. Names became shields and swords. "The Maid," they repeated softly, almost unconsciously, the words gaining power with every utterance. The girl's birthright, her character, her dignity, none of it mattered in their eyes. Titles mattered more than truth. A whispered laugh, a sideways glance, an approving nod from a respected figure, all reinforced the lie. The stepmother's pride swelled with each signal of public consent. And yet, beneath her calm exterior, the girl carried a quiet flame. She bent, carried, polished, and served, but she remembered the words her father had once whispered under the shade of the neem tree. True worth is carried in silence and patience, not shouted for applause. She endured, not because she had no voice, but because she knew that one day, patience would reveal the weight of truth heavier than any crown built on mockery. The elders sat like statues along the polished walls of the courtyard, their robes heavy with years of wisdom. Their eyes flicked over the scene, measuring, remembering, yet not a word passed their lips. Some leaned on carved canes, others tapped fingers in quiet rhythm, yet silence hung between them like a thick fog. The girl moved as she always did, swift, careful, obedient, but the laughter and whispers of the crowd struck at her heart. And still, the elders said nothing. "Do they not see," she thought, as she bent low to pick up the tray. "Do they not remember the lessons of fairness and honor?" But their silence was a cloak, one that hid complicity as much as tradition. The danger of wisdom withheld was heavier than any insult she carried that day. Through the murmurs of the guests, a new presence entered. He moved not with trumpets or fanfare, but like a whisper brushing across the courtyard floor. His robe was simple, yet his bearing commanded attention. He nodded once to the elders, acknowledging their presence, but did not seek to impress. Eyes sharp yet calm, he observed everything, every gesture, every glance, every quiet submission. There was no need for noise. Authority, he understood, needed no loud proclamation. Where others measured status with titles and gold, he measured it in restraint and respect. He adjusted nothing, demanded nothing, and yet his presence settled over the room like the shade of a baobab tree, solid, patient, and unshakable. Unlike the guests who fawned over the stepmother, he watched the patterns of the household with quiet curiosity, noting the rules of power hidden beneath smiles and laughter. It was in the girl's small movements that he noticed the truth others missed. The careful way she balanced the trays, the soft dip of her eyes before lifting them respectfully, the gentle posture that spoke of dignity despite the name she had been given. Pride and assumption had blinded the crowd, but he saw the quiet strength that ran beneath her skin. Something about her did not match the story spoken aloud. Even the smallest gestures told him more than any proclamation could. The way she hesitated just long enough to avoid spilling a cup, the fleeting glance toward the elders, the patient lifting of dust from the floor with care that spoke of someone used to doing more than mere chores. Each action whispered contradictions to the lie the stepmother had painted. And in those subtleties, he began to sense the fracture in the narrative. Not all was as it seemed, and beneath the calm surface, a river of truth waited, deep and patient, ready to flow. The courtyard was alive with sound. Music pulsed from the drums outside, mingling with the chatter of traders, elders, and townsfolk who had come to witness the gathering. Laughter rang out, glasses clinked, and the scent of roasted meats mingled with the perfume of finely woven cloths. Pride and showfulness swelled in the air, pressing on every corner of the large compound. Yet beneath the noise, a stillness waited, quiet as a riverbed hidden beneath the rushing current. Truth, patient and deep, lingered, unnoticed by most, biding its time. The stepmother sat at the head of the courtyard, perched like a queen on a throne she had built with careful hands and sharp words. Her skirts gleamed, her posture flawless, and her smile serene. Every gesture radiated confidence, the kind that comes from years of unchecked authority. "See what order I have brought," she seemed to say without speaking. "See what power is mine to command." In her mind, the story she had written, the daughter reduced to a mere servant, was untouchable, unbreakable. The girl stood at the side, tray balanced in her hands, shoulders straight despite the weight of expectation. She had endured much before, and she braced herself for yet another public wound. Humiliation had become a familiar companion, yet she carried it as one might carry a heavy stone, aware of its weight, but steady in her grip. Her heart beat a slow, measured rhythm, preparing her for the unknown that always followed the stepmother's prideful displays. Then, a movement cut through the noise. One man rose where all others remained seated. The visitor stood, deliberate and calm. Heads turned, eyes narrowing in curiosity, yet no one spoke. The rhythm of chatter and laughter faltered as the quiet authority of the man filled the space. He did not call attention to himself, he did not announce his action with words or gesture, but the crowd sensed a shift, as if the ground beneath them had subtly tilted. Silence followed, falling over the gathering like a cloth draped from the tallest baobab tree. Laughter, whispers, and clinking of glasses all stilled. Even the stepmother felt it, a strange tension crawling along her spine. The elders leaned back slightly, acknowledging the presence of something greater than titles or wealth. The girl, standing still with her tray, felt the hush settle around her, a gentle protection she had not expected. In the calm, authority spoke without a single word. The visitor's quiet power was a stark contrast to the borrowed dominance of the stepmother, whose control relied on fear and perception. Here was someone who carried moral strength in restraint, who commanded respect simply by presence and observation. No proclamation was necessary. The room knew it, and the air itself seemed to bend toward recognition of a higher justice waiting to unfold. The visitor's eyes swept over the crowd, But he did not glance at the stepmother seated upon her polished chair of borrowed authority. Instead, his gaze fell directly on the girl who stood at the side, hands folded lightly over the tray. A hush seemed to gather around him, as if the wind itself had carried away the noise of the gathering. By not acknowledging the woman who had claimed the throne, he shifted the center of power. A subtle tremor passed through the stepmother's posture, the first crack in the carefully polished armor of her dominance. He raised his voice, calm and steady, carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Bring her here," he said. Not the maid, not a servant, but her, by her name, as though it had never been forgotten. Every ear in the courtyard turned, straining to catch the words. Recognition, not curiosity, lingered in his tone, like water finally reaching roots long thirsty. Whispers erupted. Confusion spread quickly, a fire racing across dry grass. The guests shifted uneasily, unsure where to look or how to respond. Eyes darted between the visitor, the stepmother, and the girl whose heart now thumped against the cage of silence she had long carried. Social order, built on appearances and assumed titles, trembled for the first time that day. The question hung heavy in the air, a weight no one had anticipated. Even the elders, who had remained silent for years, felt it pressing against the walls of their wisdom. Something irreversible had begun. The laughter faded, replaced by anticipation and a cautious fear. Then, quietly but with undeniable authority, the visitor spoke again. "I know who you are. I know the girl who walks with patience and dignity, even when the world calls her less than she is. I know the daughter of Father's name, the one whose legacy has been hidden, not lost." His words were like ancestral memory, carrying truth, not rumor. The girl's chest rose and fell with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Her father's name, long whispered in her heart, was now spoken aloud. There was no shame in it, no hesitation. The recognition restored not just her dignity, but her rightful place within the household. For the first time in years, she felt the invisible weight of her inheritance settle lightly on her shoulders, not as burden, but as a gift reclaimed. The visitor's gaze sharpened, calm yet unyielding, and the carefully constructed story the stepmother had woven began to tremble. A pause here, a contradiction there. The threads of her lies were pulled taut until the cloth of her deception began to unravel. Words she had spoken with authority, polished over years, now hung awkwardly in the air. The crowd sensed it, though few could name it. Whispers drifted like smoke, circling the truth hidden too long. The elders stirred. Faces once solemn now flickered with recognition. Their memories, long suppressed in favor of convenience and silence, returned like rain to parched earth. "This cannot be," muttered one elder, voice soft but certain. "The girl, she carries the wisdom of her father. How did we forget?" Eyes met eyes, and slowly, acknowledgment spread. In the African tradition, memory defeats deception. What was buried by fear now emerged as a living truth. The stepmother's lips pressed thin, her composure cracking under the weight of the unspoken. A flicker of panic danced in her eyes, betraying the fear she had hidden behind silk and smiles. Every gesture she made seemed rehearsed, yet hollow. She reached for control, only to feel it slipping through her fingers. Pride, long the foundation of her authority, gave way to tremors of terror. The crowd began to see shadows of her past, small manipulations, whispered rumors, subtle betrayals, all rising like dust in the sunlight. No one needed to accuse her. The truth revealed itself in actions, in inconsistencies, in the silent witnesses of her schemes. Even her allies shifted uneasily, sensing the fragility of the throne built by cunning rather than honor. Her eyes widened as the realization struck. The throne she had claimed, the house she had ruled, the respect she had commanded, all were built on sand. Without the rock of truth, every word, every gesture, every act of authority dissolved. She had ruled through illusion, and now the illusion was gone. Meanwhile, the girl's heart, long weighed by silence and endurance, felt the years of restraint finally shift. The pain of neglect, humiliation, and invisibility rose, but it did not erupt in anger. Instead, it transformed into a calm, unwavering strength. Her shoulders straightened, and her chest lifted with dignity long denied. Years of silence broke, not with a shout, but with the quiet certainty of one whose truth had finally been recognized. She stood not as the powerless child of yesterday, but as the rightful daughter, strong and unshaken. She did not raise her voice. She did not point fingers. She did not call for punishment. The air around her vibrated not with anger, but with calm certainty. Years of humiliation, years of whispers and hidden chores, had taught her one truth: justice is not delivered by revenge, but by recognition. "I am the daughter of the man whose name built this house," she said softly, yet every word carried the weight of mountains. Those who had laughed, those who had whispered judgments, now felt the quiet authority of someone who knew her place in the world, not as the servant she had been called, but as the rightful heir. Even the elders, who had observed silently, nodded with a slow, deliberate understanding. The stepmother sank into her chair as if the wood itself had swallowed her pride. No one needed to shout. The truth had cleared the room of false authority. "You see," murmured one elder, "strength lies not in fear, but in the patience that outlives it." In front of the witnesses, the daughter's name returned to her like a river reclaiming its course. "This is Amina," the visitor said firmly, "not the maid, but the daughter of this house. Let it be known to all." The proclamation rolled through the gathering, echoing across the courtyard, touching the hearts of every guest. The identity that had been hidden, the lineage that had been denied, was restored. Eyes that had once passed judgment now lowered in quiet shame. Whispers of gossip faded as acknowledgment took root. The stepmother's power drained away without a struggle. Her throne, built on fear and illusion, collapsed quietly under the weight of truth. Amina stood tall, whole, her dignity shining brighter than any crown. Around her, the house seemed lighter, the air cleaner, as if the walls themselves remembered the legacy of her father. Justice had arrived, not with anger or spectacle, but with patience, truth, and the quiet authority that only those who endure can possess. And in that moment, the town understood a lesson older than wealth, older than pride. Those who erase others will eventually erase themselves, and those who honor truth, even in silence, are never truly defeated. The house, once heavy with secrets and whispers, seemed to breathe for the first time. The air carried the weight of truth that had been long denied. Every corner that had held manipulation now stood illuminated, as if the walls themselves remembered each lie. Faces that had feigned ignorance could no longer hide behind polite smiles. One elder stepped forward, voice steady. "We have been blind, yet the truth is patient. It does not hurry, and it does not falter." The stepmother's carefully built world trembled in silence. Her schemes, once whispered behind closed doors, were now plain for all to see. Guests shifted uneasily, understanding that justice does not need cruelty to correct itself. Consequences were visible in the shift of respect, in the quiet acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The stepmother's pride was dismantled, yet she was not humiliated by vengeance. Balance had been restored. Some voices, soft and contrite, spoke, "Forgive us, for we did not see." Those who had watched and turned away, who had laughed or remained silent, now sought reconciliation. The act of seeking forgiveness carried its own redemption, proving that even flawed hearts could find clarity in the light of truth. The hall felt different now. Titles that had once demanded obedience were meaningless in the face of integrity. Elders whispered to one another, a lesson older than gold: wealth and rank cannot shield deceit, and hollow power will always yield to the patient voice of reality. Amina, the daughter, felt the weight of bitterness lift from her shoulders. She did not clench her hands in vengeance. She did not call for punishment. Instead, she stood with the calm strength of one who had endured, letting peace fill the space that anger might have occupied. "Let us walk forward without malice," she murmured, her words carrying the wisdom of rivers that flow quietly but unceasingly. Humility found its place where pride once lingered. The community saw that honor lies in restraint, and that arrogance leaves no shelter when truth arrives. The people absorbed the lesson, understanding that lasting respect is born of patience, not spectacle. Truth, which had waited silently for years, now stood firm and unshakable. Its victory was quiet but absolute, like the first light that fills a valley at dawn. Amina did not rise above those around her, for she had learned the greatest power is in being grounded. She stood among the people, whole, rightful, and dignified, a living testament to the lessons her ancestors had whispered across generations. And in that moment, the house no longer held secrets. It held justice, humility, and a quiet reminder: that which is patient, truthful, and guided by virtue will always endure, while falsehoods, no matter how long they linger, will eventually crumble under the weight of their own making.